Phil, I don't know if you have a Waffle House order, but ever since they introduced the hash brown bowl concept, legendary, revolutionary, one of the most important things that this franchise has done.
Go on.
I've got one. And Phil, look, we know each other really well at this point,
Yes.
but I don't know how well I can rely on you definitely knowing the way that good food fast is delivered to somebody. Do you have a standing Waffle House order? Is Waffle House a thing? I know, look, you come from the highfalutin lands of the Northwest.
Right.
I don't want to presuppose here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to think you're super fancy or something, but look, Southeastern food, it's an important thing. I went to Florida State, the home area code of Waffle House, the house of the waffle, which it's called Waffle House, but anybody who's been to Waffle House and knows Waffle House knows that the real order is what your hash brown order is.
Sure.
So I'm tempting fate here. We didn't rehearse this. We didn't note this. We didn't work this out. That's just where I went for breakfast this morning.
Right.
And I realized I have a compelling need to know what Phil West's Waffle House order is. If he has one, our entire friendship hinges on this, Phil.
I typically will only get to a Waffle House on a road trip to New Orleans.
Okay. All right.
And that's about it. So
fully acceptable.
There will be hash browns and eggs involved. Smothered and covered, I think, is something that I've done.
Okay. Okay. Smothered and covered. Phil, I'm proud of you.
Good.
Phil,
look, I'm passing the test.
Phil, no, flying colors, smothered and covered. Phil, it's like you studied for this. It's almost like I prepped you for this, which I got to be honest, I did not.
No, you just dropped me on this morning. We thought we were actually doing
something totally different.
Yeah, we were going to record on Sunday morning because there were a bunch of games that we wanted to talk to, but no.
We breakfast orders are important. Okay, smothered and covered. All right, eggs, hash browns. Well, like when you walk into a Waffle House, I'm not gonna get real persnickety with you. You know, what is it that you walk into a Waffle House, Phil? What is the Phil West? I walk into a Waffle House. This is what I need. Okay. What is the Phil West order?
If they don't have A1 sauce, I'm upset.
Okay. They always have A1 sauce. Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. You're fine.
That's about it. And as long as I don't see any roaches or anything like that, I'm good.
Phil, come on.
I mean, it's a bit of a dice roll, probably, right?
Come on. Phil, hold on. You're Waffle House. I mean, maybe it's not called Waffle Home.
It is in the South, right?
It is in the South. It is in the South, but you need to look. If it's good enough for Anthony Bourdain, to call it just a good, honest meal, you got to have a certain level of respect for it. So for me, I'm just gonna throw this out there. I'm gonna put this out to the people. I go smothered, covered, diced, capped, and topped. Onions, tomatoes, mushrooms, cheese. That's the whole thing. You do the sausage, egg, and cheese hash brown bowl. That covers all your bases. Phil, that's the only meal you need. Driving all across these United States.
And now that you have carb loaded, let's talk about some soccer. We get there.
3,000 calories later.
Emergency podcast. Better did a thing, so we gotta talk about it. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency. Emergency podcast. Shut up, hurry up, shut up, hurry up, shut up. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency.
Hey, a hearty hello to you all, and welcome to Emergency Podcast, the Austin FC podcast, where we talk about all the Austin FC emergencies, the Waffle House emergencies, the summer of soccer emergencies, everything that is going on. We have to start this by saying that one of us really is loving the Club World Cup, and one of us is named Phil West. So Moises, tell me what is compelling you about the Club World Cup. You have been blowing up my phone over the last week with
Phil,
updates from games, which I've appreciated because I've been
Phil,
doing work things and having family in town and stuff like that, and
look,
haven't been able to fully immerse myself in the Club World Cup as you have.
it's important for the man who, and this is something I'm very happy to constantly promote. The man who not only wrote the book on U.S. soccer, but you wrote the U.S. soccer book twice. Okay,
Yep.
this is that's these are just the facts of the matter. I'm not exaggerating anything. My pleasure and my honor to be on the line right now with the man who wrote the book on U.S. soccer twice. Who else
Right.
did that? Nobody. I honestly feel like I can confidently say that. You're focusing so much on the Gold Cup. You're like, oh, Canada World Cup champions 2026.
Might revise that a little bit.
I have
We'll
no
see.
argument
We'll get
against
there.
that. I'm gonna look. It's early. It's early. Contenders 2026. I think that's fair to say. That's reasonable to
Oh yeah.
say
Yep.
without any kind of overestimation. Here's what I love about Club World Cup, and I know this may be controversial to people who go, well, FIFA and all they care about is money, and it's not a real tournament. What I love about the men's World Cup and the women's World Cup is this culmination of world football.
Mm-hmm.
All 6 continents that don't involve Antarctica and clubs that you may not be familiar with. Clubs that you may not follow Urawa Red Diamonds. You may not follow Ulsan HD. But as we record this, yesterday, Phil, I texted this to you. I would never have imagined myself going, I am riveted to my seat watching Fluminense versus Ulsan HD, one of the
Right.
giants of Brazil, one of the great clubs of world soccer, and a South Korean club that I would challenge anybody listening to this to be like, oh, yeah, you knew that this club existed before you knew they were in the Club World Cup this year.
So you have teams that you were familiar with, but not in these contexts. Like, for example, when I was picking up karaoke equipment at Rock and Roll Rentals and was dipping into Flamengo Chelsea a little bit, checking in about the point that Chelsea got a red card. Pretty enjoyable to watch Chelsea lose to a team from another continent.
Like, this is the incredible thing is you watch a World Cup in the traditional sense. In the 25 years that the Club World Cup has existed, it has never existed with this format. I feel like proviso-wise, I've got to throw out there, yes, there are all kinds of issues that I think it is totally reasonable for people to have with FIFA as an organization, with the profit-seeking nature of putting together a tournament, that blah, 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 blah. But what is undeniable to me is the allure of seeing players on the world stage that I'm completely unfamiliar with, that are the giants of Japan, that are the giants of South Korea, that are the giants of South Africa. Okay. These are teams that I would never be paying regular attention to unless I were performatively trying to go, oh, yeah, I pay so much attention to AFCON. I pay a little bit of attention to AFCON. I pay enough attention to AFCON to be dangerous. But the way that this new revised Club World Cup format is set up, this is what it should have been a quarter century ago.
Sure.
This is what takes the magic of a World Cup, as so many of us know it and have known it for decades, and applies it to the club criterion. You're looking at clubs that are the champions of the champions. If you love the UEFA Champions League, if you love the CONCACAF Champions Cup, you are getting the champions of the champions from the big confederations. Sure. Would it be great to see Club America in this competition? Absolutely sure. Is it almost just as good watching LAFC get dunked on? Abso-gosh-darn-lutely. Like, the thing that I think that people who are self-selecting out of this for either the FIFA of it or the zone, the most Chicago of the streaming services of it,
Dazn,
You
which I thought at first was Dazen. It's like
Dazen, yeah, as
Dazen's a stupid name for a
and
stupid, but no,
DAZN.
it's even stupider.
They're both stupid. They're really stupid. And I got to say this, as many criticisms as I have for Apple when it comes to MLS Season Pass, oh boy. Oh boy, does the zone with, by the way, we got this Jake Paul and Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. match on June 28th. Every time I get repeated that over and over and over again, I'm like, okay, here's the weird anime ad for some pharma thing. And oh, here's yet another of the messy Lowe's ad, or oh, here's the one of the 3 Michelob Ultra ads that I've seen 70 times.
The app's working okay though. Like
The app's working fine.
I expected less functionality, to be quite
Me
frank.
too.
So yeah, so that's a plus.
Is the thing.
Yes, yeah. One thing that is not working though is, and one thing that is a little distressing for me about Club World Cup is just the performance of the MLS teams. You have Miami that is possibly getting through, but then you also have LAFC, which was the first team out. Congratulations. And then you have the Sounders, which are all but out, and they have to engineer some kind of miracle win against PSG on Monday and hope that results go their way in the other match, which is Botafogo and Atletico Madrid. Also, as an Atletico fan, it was not terribly fun to see them get thumped by PSG as they did. There are some results that have been less than satisfactory. Soccer has certainly been compelling if you can find it, if you can watch matches. And again, that is there are some weird start times. We had LAFC playing their first match against Chelsea in Atlanta at 3 p.m. on a weekday. 2,200 miles from their home stadium. Scheduling there maybe could have been better. But the good thing about this, and we'll get to this in a sec, I want to get Moisés' last thoughts here about Club World Cup, but I do want to get into how this affects Austin FC, or rather how it doesn't affect Austin FC, because looming on the calendar, their next 2 matches are against the Sounders on June 28th and hosting LAFC on July 5th. We were concerned maybe a little bit at the start of this tournament that that was going to affect things, and if those teams had advanced, that would have delayed games. It would have put Austin on a longer vacation than maybe they had anticipated or wanted, but happily now that is not the case. They will play as scheduled, and we'll get into that upcoming schedule in a second here. A little teaser for what is coming in the next couple of minutes, but don't fast forward though, because Club World Cup's important to talk about. So let's get the rest of your thoughts on what this is about and why people should be watching if they're not.
And look, setting entirely aside my personal support for Inter de Milan, Internazionale di Milano, okay? An Italian team name that I said with a thoroughly Cuban accent. I'm thrilled that they are doing as well as they are in the wake of them getting absolutely wrecked by PSG in the Champions League final for UEFA. The couple of things spiritually, if you'll permit me, great cardinal of footy, Phil West, is that watching Ulsan HD yesterday against Fluminense, if you had told me, I would be riveted to my seat watching a South Korean team that, full disclosure, I was completely unfamiliar with prior to their breaking into this competition, playing one of the giants of Brazil, one of the great teams of South America, I wouldn't have believed you. In a million years, I would not have believed you. But what went from a 2-1 lead by an underdog team from South Korea to a 4-2 scoreline for the favored side from Brazil, some of the most entertaining, unexpected soccer that I've gotten to watch in I don't know how many months. That to me is the promise of a properly planned and formatted Club World Cup. Could it use probably some notes? Absolutely. I think that it could use more representation from other continental confederations than CONCACAF and UEFA. As much as I enjoyed watching Urawa Red Diamonds and Ulsan HD, I feel like there could have been some more AFCON teams in there. The Auckland City of it all, where there is one group that is very much hinging on who can hang the most points on the semi-pro team of players who literally have other jobs in addition to the fact that they play soccer for a team that made it into a World Cup competition.
But it's important to represent Oceania.
It's important to represent Oceania. And talking to a friend who is from Auckland, lives in Auckland as we speak, I love hearing that the energy in Auckland, a city that is much more about rugby, let's be honest, there is so much support for these boys who are not expected in any way to make it out of the group stage. We're never expected to make it out of the group stage. That there is love for their home team in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Honestly, like brings a little bit of a tear to my eye. This World's game, that it has that kind of thing for a team whose home fans do not in any way expect them to progress.
Right, right.
That's what this sport, that's what these kinds of competitions are all about.
Mm-hmm.
It is what Taika Waititi made a dramatized film of something that was a documentary from friend of the show, Thomas Rongan, and his brilliant coaching work for a team that nobody expected to make some kind of progress.
And
I wish that more people felt comfortable going, yeah, this is a thing to be excited about. And I feel like in 4 years, this concept might change, that people may go, oh, this is something worth paying attention to. This is something that is worthy of looking at in the same kind of elevated sense that the World Cup, the men's World Cup, the women's World Cup should be viewed as.
Right. The same group that had Ulsan and Fluminense also had Mamelani Sundowns, almost upsetting Dortmund, coming back from 4-1 down to bring it to 4-3. And that's not something that you would have expected as a narrative going into this. Yeah, it's fun. I think part of it is just, it's coming at the start of summer up against Gold Cup. And not that Gold Cup is hugely compelling for a lot of soccer fans if you look at the Q2 stands on Thursday night, but I think that has more to do with the ticket prices being close to $100 and not dropping from that amount than maybe any other factor that was there. And it's the start of summer, people are doing vacations, things like that. It is a really tough time to get a relatively unknown concept, I think, off the ground. But I do think that the soccer has been compelling. Maybe the scheduling, maybe the kind of fanfare around it has not been necessarily speaking to soccer, which to me, American soccer fans, it all kind of seems like everything's in a really weird place for a country that is co-hosting a World Cup in a year. I think it's good they're attempting this. I am happy that this is in our lives, especially in your life.
Doubling back to what I mentioned about being an Inter Milan fan, my sister married an Interista who's been an Inter Milan fan his whole life, which is how I became a fan of this club. Watching Inter play Urawa Red Diamonds, the Red Devils, one of the titans of the J League yesterday, and watching that underdog team score the first goal unanswered for, I want to say it was like 70 minutes, because this mega team from Europe underestimated them. Didn't matter that I was rooting for the opposite team. Watching those fans in the stands filling out the supporter section in Lewin Field, that was thrilling. That to me was world football. Invading a U.S. venue with the kind of energy that, whether you're talking about a Japanese baseball game, whether you're talking about Japanese soccer, there is a different kind of energy that Japanese supporters bring. That was absolute magic. There are loads of things and incredibly empty stadiums in Orlando City, to note one in particular, that have shown up over the course of the group stage so far. But to me, those beautiful opportunities of getting a peek into leagues and confederations that a lot of, let's be honest, like American soccer fans will pay attention to the European leagues, the South American leagues, the U.S. leagues, the North American leagues, and so on.
Right.
There's just a little bit of magic in that I cannot let myself tack into the cynicism of Oh, well, it's all about money. Oh, well, it's all about this. No, well, there are only this so many clubs from this continent and that kind of thing. I feel like I hate to have to admit this, but I feel like FIFA got this more right than wrong, which, yeah, it's a begrudging thing for me to admit because, oh my God, am I a FIFA critic in so many ways. But down to engaging the ref cams, I think that's something that, whether it was a win of the refs union or not, showing people how difficult the ref's job is and what the literal first person perspective view of the refs is,
Mm-hmm.
that's something that is good for world football on the whole.
Right. Yeah.
In advance of the year of a national World Cup, I went into this expecting to be way, way more critical, way, way more cynical about all of this. And LAFC and Seattle not doing so well is one thing. Inter Miami's doing okay. And yes, they're a cheat code in the video gaming parlance of things.
Sure. Yeah.
But also, as much as I might have issues with the weird, I don't know, exceptions to roster rules, I'm going to say that. Yeah, exceptions to roster rules that it seems like they get. I don't know. I don't know how you explain that. Watching that team play is part of the promise of seeing MLS on the bigger world stage and being able to compete. And as much as Seattle and LAFC have been steamrolled by bigger teams with bigger salary caps, if you even want to call it that, I feel like they showed a significant amount of fight and interest in the ways that I would compare directly to Ulsan HD and Urawa Red Diamonds, teams that were very much considered absolutely not part of the conversation, not likely to move on past the group stage, but who gave it their absolute all the entire time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So DAZN is where you can find that. It is free during the tournament to access it. If you do feel compelled to watch boxing after this, you have it and you can pay for it. I'm probably not that person. But,
yeah, I don't know that I'm pay-per-viewing the Jake Paul versus Julio Cesar Chavez match as many times as I'll hear Maka or Dunny or even Andres Cantor, the king. If there's any Spanish language native commentator that I love hearing do English commentary for a match more than Andres Cantor, I don't think there is one. But hearing Andres Cantor going, Jake Paul and Julio Cesar Chavez, they're fighting on pay-per-view. Pre-order it now. I'm still not going to do that. But I'm going to pay a little bit more attention because it's Andres Cantor trying to solve.
At least you're aware of that. Okay, let's pivot to Austin now real quick. As you were listening to this now, they are preparing for an actual full week of training in advance of their match against the Sounders, which will go as scheduled. That is on June 28th. And then they are hosting LAFC on July 5th. And then they have that quarterfinal match coming up against San Jose in the US Open Cup. That is July 8th. And then, in case you haven't peeked at the schedule from there, it looks winnable. You got hosting New England on July 12th. You are playing in Carson on the 16th against DC United away on July 26th. And then you have Copa Tejas action. You have Austin hosting the Dynamo on August 9th and then hosting FC Dallas on August 16th. And then the trip to Montreal on August 23rd. And then you are rounding out August by hosting said San Jose from Open Cup quarterfinal action. And then just as a little bonus peek here into September, next two matches at Sporting KC and at FC Dallas. I don't want to be giddy with excitement or optimism, but that seems like a much more favorable schedule than, say, what Austin faced in May.
I think that's a completely reasonable thing. One of the things that I would interject there is there are a fair amount of weeks off, which seem like a good thing on its face. But also, remember what happened a couple of years ago when there were a lot of weeks off?
I do.
Well, Phil,
different circumstances, but yes.
Different circumstances. The point holds of you have a lot of weeks off and maybe you fill those with some friendlies and that kind of thing. There are those various weeks of Leagues Cup that take up a bunch of the other MLS teams that are not in Open Cup. It's going to be an interesting month is the way that I see it. is Seattle not mathematically eliminated, but let's be honest, they're eliminated from Club World Cup. That match is happening next Saturday, period. Unless something stupid happens, which who knows. I think it would
not
be
a chance. Well, there's a chance, but
there is a chance.
infinitesimal chance, I would say. Like I wrote earlier this week, I would count on that match happening.
As you, I think, very reliably put it. The variable that I think is interesting is we've mentioned that that for Club World Cup, Lumen Field has temporarily put in natural grass. And there's a 3-day turnover between the last match at Lumen for Club World Cup and that Saturday match. And I hope for those Austin players that they get to play in Lumen on natural grass, because 3 days is a crazy turnaround to just suddenly put the turf back in. Why not just
turf?
Tear up the natural grass one more time for old time's sake.
We're not going to use it.
We're not going to use it. Why not? Why not let the old Austin boys tear it up? I would love that for these guys. And I've joked in recent days, boy, Sebastian Driussi is going to finally get to play on grass at Lumen Field. And then he got injured.
So
in the opening match for River and never ended up getting to play on grass at Lumen Field. I hope for Austin players who have suffered that turf in the very rain-prone Cascadia that they do get the opportunity to play on actual grass while it's there. What could that hurt? I think, as we've prognosticated in the past, I feel like as mathematically eliminated as they are, they still have to play PSG on Monday. Even if they heavily rotate, which I don't know that Brian Schmetzer is going to heavily rotate. I feel like reputationally, the Seattle Sounders want to show their best 11 that they can against PSG.
Yep.
Even as infinitesimally unlikely as it is for them to get it out of the group, when else are they going to play PSG, Phil?
Exactly. Yeah.
There is that opportunity. LAFC, who are mathematically eliminated, will be coming to Q2 Stadium to play on July 5th, the day after Independence Day, a game which, considering that rivalry, is going to be full of fireworks, is going to be full of high stakes and energy.
Literal fireworks, too.
Literal fireworks, as we've been told, sponsored by the Texas Lottery. Choose a quick pick if you want. That to me feels like a really great back-to-back showcase of what these players felt like they deserved to have shown about them in the month of May and what we have seen in these two most recent fixtures. My prognostication has not changed, that I fully expect the Seattle game to be a win. And I feel like the kind of heater that third win in a row will represent is going to take them into the LAFC game at home, 4th of July weekend, ready to rock and roll and ready to show people what the second half of the season is going to be like.
They are on a tight turnaround with San Jose for that Open Cup game, and that is an important one. Just because of that, I would expect that there might be a little bit of rotation heading into that game, and maybe that is not necessarily going to be a win like the others. Yeah, you do also have San Jose hosting the Red Bulls on that Saturday before the Open Cup match. Not necessarily an easy matchup for them either. So both teams are facing the same sort of issues, right? Do you rotate to maximize your chances in the Open Cup, or do you just kind of let the chips fall where they may and focus on league? Because again, San Jose is in a position not dissimilar to Austin. Austin's in a little bit better shape now, but in terms of being in that cluster of teams that is trying to solidify a playoff place, that's where they're at as well. So again, you do see a little bit of that juggle happening in the real hot part of the year, which is a very, very MLS thing. But again, that's kind of the calculus that Nico Estevez and Bruce Arena are going to face. So we're to be saying that Nico Estevez and Bruce Arena are going to be coaching against each other in a US Open quarterfinal match. I love the sport a lot sometimes for things like that.
If there is a single competition more important than the Gold Cup, it's definitely the US Open Cup.
Yep.
And we are incoming on the quarterfinals in a situation that, if Austin win, results in theoretical back-to-back home matches, both in the semifinals and the finals.
You are rooting for Chicago over Minnesota. Again, that sounds like a threat.
It
But
sounds like a threat, but it's also
it's
the
something you
truth.
want. It is something you want. You would,
Zone.
yeah. Duh, semifinals.
So update us on the Gold Cup, Phil. I have not been paying much attention to the Gold Cup because I've been, as I
Well,
guess everybody is probably aware, fully consumed by the Club World Cup, the only apple of my eye, the only thing that has captivated my attention.
well, the U.S. is qualified. Huzzah. They had a very convincing opening 5-0 win against Trinidad and Tobago. Again, of course, when they are playing that island nation, here in the US, they tend to do pretty well, notably on October 10th, 2017, when they traveled to Trinidad and Tobago, they did not do well. In fact, they crashed out of World Cup qualification, dooming one of those said books, which is about the US winning the World Cup and how they could do that. And usually that starts with qualifying for the World Cup, which they did not do. So anytime I see Trinidad and Tobago on a schedule, my hackles are up a little bit because of that. So, because I actually, in that cycle, I did go to
Yeah.
Denver. I did see the actual good Trinity match, the one that they won. And then they handled, I guess you could say, Saudi Arabia 1-0 here in Q2, which again, it's fine. It's a win. It moves them along. Not as convincing, obviously, as the opener, but I was very high on Canada after they had that 6-0. After they had that 6-0 win over Honduras, and then they got up to a 1-0 lead last night against Curacao in their spiritual home of Houston, Texas, in Shell Energy Stadium. And basically, Curacao had 3 chances to equalize that game. 2 were overturned because of VAR, and then the third was not. Curacao got that equalizer in stoppage time. So after that 6-0 win, I was very high on Canada and how they were looking. Some young players in the mix, not having some of their bigger stars. Alphonso Davies, of course, is still out. A few other top-notch players were not featuring for Canada, but some very good-looking players, Nathan Saliba in particular, who got a goal in each of those first 2 matches. So Canada right now looks like they are on a trajectory to advance, but they're not looking maybe as convincing overall record-wise as the US does, although I do think that Canada does overall look like the stronger, better team. And I haven't sussed it out to figure out like if they are on a collision course, but that's my hope. I love seeing the US and Canada play. So I'm internally conflicted whenever that happens, but I still love those matches.
Do you root for your home country or the country that burned down your home country's White House?
Well, that's a way to put it.
Do you stand on guard for thee, or it's a conflicted choice? It's the US Mexico rivalry is something that no less than Paramount Plus have made documentaries about. But I think that the US Canada thing, especially with Jesse Marsh coaching Canada, that
Well,
changes the calculus a little bit.
didn't coach him these first 2 games
Did
because he
the
was on a
first two-
suspension. But
Look, he's been a naughty boy. And that's part of why people like him. I feel like the Jesse Marsh factor is something that is maybe undermentioned going into the World Cup year. There's a grudge match energy built into that. It is one of the host nations. It is somebody who definitely was up in theory for the USMNT job, who is in charge of a different country's men's national team. And I don't know, that's my hedging speculation for 2026 is that the Jesse Marsh factor is something that people are like, yeah, okay, Jesse Marsh, he's clever and he makes some jokes and he makes some jabs. I feel like it's going to be spicier and more entertaining than people give it credit for. And I think him not coaching those first couple of matches, I think, if anything, is just giving people a reason to not pay attention to it just yet. That's my long lead prediction of something that maybe we haven't seen that much of in the Gold Cup that might figure into next year.
Right. And by the way, if either the US or Canada get to the final, just a reminder that is Sunday, July 6th, and that is in Houston. That's an Energy Stadium. So
Oh my.
a relatively short drive away to see kind of the closest thing that you will get to a World Cup match before next year's World Cup.
Bon voyage to Shell Energy Stadium. Sorry.
That's going to be an interesting weekend. You've got LAFC Seattle on that Saturday, and then you've got potentially US versus Canada or US versus Mexico or Canada versus Mexico or whatever else might transpire. Again, the brackets are very confusing. So I think US and Canada could end up in the finals looking at this, but you've got the D winner and the B winner on the other side of the bracket. And I assume that's going to be the US and Canada. And then if you are following along, Mexico is in Group A, which is slotted with D, it looks like. So I think you might have a Canada-Mexico semifinal as a possibility, assuming that all those teams advance and do all the stuff that they're supposed to do. Looking at this is that the US might end up against Panama in the semifinals, assuming that everything goes chalk. And that's not great given kind of what's happened lately, but we'll see. We'll see. I think the US could theoretically handle Panama.
The most important thing is wordplay wise, do you believe that we will win?
Who's we in this case?
In the United States. The United States.
I certainly can. Yeah, I see the possibility. I mean, again, of course, they do not have their strongest team here, but neither do some of the other main contestants and all that. They certainly could. I mean, again, I think if they don't win it, there's going to be a lot of concerns. There's going to be a lot of criticism because that's just generally how World Cup stuff goes. I think if they get to the finals and lose, then perhaps there is no shame in that or little shame in that. But again, then I think it's just a matter of assessing how this tournament went, what Pochettino has, what kind of buy-in there is. And I think we talked about this a little bit, actually. We should mention this. On Wednesday night, we had a little field trip. BB Riley's and Mueller, we both found ourselves watching Roger Bennett interview Clint Dempsey. Which was a kind of interesting way to lead into Thursday night's game. And got some thoughts from Dempsey about kind of Pochettino and some of the players that were getting the chance to shine in this tournament, particularly Diego Luna, which I think we're all fans of him, and then Malik Tillman, who Pochettino seems to believe in, and Dempsey like that kind of level of endorsement, this kind of idea that there should be these kind of questions on the roster, that nobody should be plugged into the starting 11 in Sharpie, that it should be just mechanical pencil and something that you can race and move as needed. So just thoughts and overall impressions on that, other than annoyance with the American Outlaws that were next to us chanting the whole time.
I'll put this out there for the United States of stationery. I appreciate the notion of mechanical pencil and erasable plans with lineups and everything. Congratulations to Clint Dempsey, the legend, the Deuce himself, for his new podcast, The Deuce, on the Men in Blazers network, which this was not so veiled of a promotional opportunity to mention, oh, by the way, we got Clint Dempsey doing his new podcast for us. He's a great talker. This is something that I appreciated the opportunity to say to him after the recording itself, that as somebody who grew up in Texas, a state that is not all about soccer, that is mostly all about a different sport called football, he and I were born in the same year. And it's something that, as I've said to you, and I'll say it here on the air, being an avid follower of the U.S. men's national team has always been a very conflicted kind of a thing for me. It's not something that I've always felt at home or welcome as a part of the cheering crowd for that. It's a different kind of vibe than the kind of Murga-built fan base that you have with a lot of MLS teams. And that's something that extended to, as you mentioned, the constantly chanting and cheering to the point of heckling a podcast that they seem to be there in support of, members of the most visible U.S. men's national team supporters group. Clint Dempsey is the kind of player that changes that kind of thinking, that makes it less Hulk Hogan, I am a real American kind of a thing, that is more about, look, believe in these players, believe in the quality of the play on the field. The reasons that I am unreservedly a supporter of the U.S. women's national team. And I'm not alone. I know that I'm not alone. There are a lot of people who really would love nothing more than to feel like there isn't something weirdly nationalistic or weirdly jingoistic attached to supporting the U.S. men's national team. And I feel like we might almost be there. We might almost be at that point where those of us who have reservations, who have felt marginalized out of it being okay to support this team, we might be on the verge of actually being welcome inside the tent, rather, that a whole pole of the tent is fine for us to hang out under. but it's still going to take a little bit of time. Clint is the kind of personality associated with that team that makes that a little bit more palatable for me personally.
Yeah.
And I think that Men in Blazers elevating his voice, having something where he's not just a guy on the desk for Fox Sports, a guy on the desk for Paramount Plus or CBS or whatever it is, it does make a difference. It matters. He made allusions in that recording to dark times that we live in, difficult times that people are dealing with. And that's not nothing. That is no small thing. And I think that to the extent that you have Juventus players standing behind the current president of the United States who are visibly unhappy about standing behind said president of the United States, and
made for a little bit of an awkward press conference.
Made for an awkward press conference.
For everybody involved.
I'm glad that they made it awkward, those who made it awkward. That's the kind of thing that does push the needle on what I see as the culture surrounding the U.S. men's national team. And this is not something I say lightly. This is something we've talked about privately, and I'm comfortable talking about publicly. As a kid who grew up multi-mixed race in North Texas, the home of the Texas Rangers, the home of the Dallas Cowboys, all right, I have wanted nothing more than to feel at home supporting my men's national team. And I'm not saying that Poch has gotten us there. I'm not saying that Clint moves the needle all the way over there. But I did not expect to find myself on the other side of this week saying that I think we can get there. I think it is possible. I think that there is work that can be done and that very well might get done in advance of a World Cup year next year as the one-third host nation that can make something that I've wanted since I was a kid in 1994 happen.
Yeah. To me, what was so illuminating about Dempsey and his perspective was just, to me, he embodied the spirit of the 2010 and the 2014 teams, that kind of ethos of trying, which he talked about with Diego Luna in particular right now as a player that is carrying that kind of torch into this current generation of players. It's been great to see him emerge, but just the U.S. as this kind of underdog, which is a very unfamiliar thing, right? Because if you watch the Olympics, if you see the U.S. basketball team, if you see, even the women's soccer team, you see this kind of dominance, you see this expectation that the U.S. is going to be among the elite, that they're going to, if not win, come very close to winning. And then some might feel robbed that they did not win. But the U.S. is a whole different animal. There is this kind of underdog status. Only 8 teams have won a men's World Cup, and the U.S. has come vaguely tantalizingly close. One year, of course, they were in 3rd place in 1930.
Well, so it's in the same zone as my father's home country of Cuba, becoming the first Caribbean nation to enter a World Cup in, I want to say it was 34, 38, something like that.
Yeah.
Look, it was a crazy time, the 1930s. A lot of things were happening.
Yeah, there were 13 teams in the World Cup in 1930, which is a weird number.
Like Cuba made it into the World Cup.
Whoever could get there by boat, basically.
Okay. Cuba qualified for a World Cup. That's all that matters. Okay, moving on.
Right. But what I was saying is this kind of idea of, you do have this underdog status for the U.S. and you had Dempsey embodying that, this kind of idea of fight and verve and hustle, and maybe having a talent gap there that you're conscious of, but being able to play in a style with a sort of intelligence and a scrappiness that makes you competitive on that same stage, where you can go up against a Germany or a France or an Argentina and in some cases hold your own. We've seen other cases, of course, where that has not happened. I do distinctly remember a U.S.-Argentina match in the Copa America Centenario, which did not go well for the U.S., where the U.S. had difficulties progressing the ball past the halfway line, which again reminded me of certain dire Austin FC games of yore. But to see this kind of idea of, here we go again, here is the US in this kind of underdog status, but also conflated with this weirdness of, okay, we're hosting this, when I had done the writing of the book, I believe that we will win heading into the 2018 World Cup. The projection was never about, yeah, we can win this in 18. It was about, we can win this in 26. We have this golden generation of players who are coming up, and now this is upon us, and it looks a lot less settled than I had thought that it would then. I was very optimistic about kind of the progression of where things were going, and a lot of that had to do with players like Dempsey and Landon Donovan and the kind of abilities that they had and the ability to dig deep and get these great moments and get these victories and these kind of key draws out of situations where odds were heavily stacked against them. And I thought the combination of players coming up with that same kind of sense of fight was going to help out. And weirdly now I see Canada in that slot where I saw the US back then, in terms of they have players who are coming up on the world stage that are making impressions, and there's this kind of solidified team identity, and it is based on this kind of underdoggy chip on your shoulder. And also with the belief that you can hang against good teams. Of course, we didn't quite see that manifest in the last World Cup. They looked really good going into it and fell apart. But I feel different this year. And I think that hosting status is actually, in a way, maybe going to help Canada more than the US. But again, we shall see. That's why they play the games. And this Gold Cup should provide us some answers. So I'm excited about that. But also, Clint Dempsey strangely provided some answers too, which I wasn't quite expecting. Also, if you haven't seen the story yet, he talks about that goal against England in the 2010 World Cup and just the storyline behind that and his belief in that. That was pretty compelling to me. That was, to me, the highlight moment of that event, just to learn that and have that kind of perspective. Go back and look at the article and see that in its glory.
It's really solid. I'm happy to say this in full audio view of our audience. But as I said to you, as we were in line waiting for this podcast taping with a member of the U.S. men's national team, I'm going to try to quote myself exactly, but Phil, I don't care about the men's national team. I don't care. I don't care. I'm here for a good podcast. It's Raj, it's Clint. They're great talkers. And there was something of a transformative effect for me that I didn't anticipate going into it.
That's great. Good.
There was so much about the way that Clint talks about, this didn't have to be the sport that he chose. But as a kid from Nacogdoches, Texas, whose parents were in the audience, the way that Clint talked about this sport that we love, like I went up to his mom and dad after the taping, knowing the kinds of sacrifices that it takes to support a kid who's competing in a sport that is not, it's not football, it's not basketball, it's not even baseball, in a state like Texas. And look, knowing that their life experience and their way of moving in the world is different than mine and everything, but knowing what it's like coming up in this state, I don't know. This is not something that the Men in Blazers Corporation or Clint Dempsey Incorporated could have possibly planned.
Or Camarena Tequila, for that matter.
Or Camarena Tequila, the smooth tequila that Roger Bennett holds up whenever it is contractually obligated by a sponsor.
A lot of product placement in that.
A lot of product placement.
Podcast taping, by the way.
Hey, calm down. Look, I'm an ad guy.
That's how you pay the bills.
Let the ad people pay the bills. I don't know. I did not go into this expecting to be moved, but I feel like I should have, knowing the way that he talks about this sport, knowing the way that he thinks about the way that this sport causes American citizens to interface with the world, and the transformative effect that he sees the furtherance of this sport in the country having on people. It's not overt. It's not, I guess you would say, like the overt activist kind of personality. It is, this is just the sport, and it's beautiful. We call it the beautiful game because there's something really beautiful about the way that this sport expresses the personality of players, of a country, in a way that does not have to be jingoistic, does not have to be nationalistic, that can be a different version of national expression that doesn't have to be ugly. and can just be beautiful.
Mhm.
Clint Dempsey got me, man.
Okay.
Clint Dempsey got me.
All right. So with that, we will leave it. Enjoy some Gold Cup, enjoy some Club World Cup while we are still waiting for Austin to kick back into gear, but that is happening this week. So by the time that we record next, we will be previewing a match in Seattle, unless strange things have happened. And then we will be talking about the Sounders' miracle victory and some delays and what that means for Austin FC. And then we'll probably indulge in some more international soccer talk as summer often foists upon us.
That is like the worst thing I've ever heard in the history of the 7 years that I've been on this planet.